All right, so why don't we go ahead and get started? It seems like there's a couple more people filing in. So I wanted to introduce myself. I am Kaitlyn Wilworth. I'm a registered dietitian at On Point. If you're just joining us for the first time, On Point Nutrition is a virtual nutrition counseling company. We're a qualified set of dietitians and nutritionists who provide personalized programs to help you reach your health goals. We always work at the pace that our clients need to help people regain their confidence when it comes to food, lead a healthier lifestyle. But in tonight's webinar, we'll be discussing primarily the low FODMAP diet. This is something a ton of our clients come to us to work on to help identify triggers and find relief from IBS symptoms. I work really closely with a lot of clients with the low FODMAP diet, so this is something that I'm really familiar with, and I'm excited to get started. So I am also going to pause for questions twice throughout the webinar. So I'm going to go through a little bit of the basics about the low FODMAP diet, what it is, and kind of how you can apply it. And I'll pause after that before going through the slides here and showing you how to really build out a meal plan. So the goals for tonight are to learn about the low FODMAP diet, learn how to prepare a low FODMAP meal plan for a week, and learn how to add variety, flavor, and seasoning through what is a fairly restrictive diet. So I think that's really the thing that I work on with my clients the most, outside of just the actual low FODMAP process itself, is adding flavor, adding variety, making your food not super boring during a time that could be otherwise pretty restrictive. So I'm going to go through a little bit of an intro about what the low FODMAP diet is, and then we can just kind of jump into everything. So the low FODMAP diet is a protocol used to identify IBS triggers. So this protocol was created by Monash University, and it's been proven to improve symptoms in most people suffering from IBS. So there is about 20% of the IBS population that won't respond to low FODMAP for whatever reason. It's hypothesized that it has something to do with external environmental factors being more so the triggers for someone's IBS. So things like, exercise, anxiety, there could be some other triggers as far as meal timing, meal size, things like that aren't necessarily related to specific food triggers themselves. So that's what they're thinking, what researchers are thinking is the reason why there's a certain subset of the IBS population that won't respond to this approach. But for most people, it works really well. And I've had a lot of really great success with my clients using this approach in the past and currently. So it's a really reliable tool to use in identifying IBS triggers. So FODMAPs are basically short chain carbohydrates that are not fully digested or absorbed in our intestines. So for that reason, they function differently than other foods in the intestines. They pull water in and they create excess gas along the way, which causes our intestinal walls to stretch and expand. This is a normal process that happens in every human being, but most people don't feel the effects of this stretching. People with IBS often have highly sensitive guts. It's called visceral hypersensitivity. So basically what happens is that when this normal stretching and pressure that builds up in the intestines happens in someone with IBS, they feel exaggerated sensations of pain from this and a lot of discomfort. So that's really where these FODMAPs come into play in terms of causing some of the IBS symptoms that you might know of. So FODMAP stands for fermentable oligo monosaccharides and polyols. So these compounds are found in many of the foods that we eat every single day, such as just certain fruits, vegetables, breads, cereals, nuts, legumes, dairy products. I think a common misconception that a lot of my clients with IBS have coming to work with me is that they'll say, oh, I really cleaned up my diet. I started eating really healthy. I included a lot of fruits and vegetables and whole grains, and my symptoms got worse. A lot of times that's related to the FODMAP content in food, because a lot of our traditionally healthful foods, fruits, vegetables, whole grains, have very high FODMAP content. So I say to my clients a lot of the times, like, unfortunately, the lower quality food sometimes makes us feel better because it's a little bit easier for our systems to digest. So with that being said, basically, the Monash University, who came up with the low FODMAP diet, they use lab testing to identify the FODMAP content of food to help better guide the low FODMAP diet process. So this is a fairly new approach. So they're still coming out with a lot of the foods that we are, hoping to have them test. So really, if it's an untested food, we kind of just say that it's one that we'll stay away from and we'll reintroduce when the time comes. And there's also a little bit of a culture gap there because Monash University is, I believe, out of Australia. So a lot of the foods that they've tested are local to that environment. So it's a little bit different than some of the stuff we might have here. But for the most part, most of your basic foods are pretty much covered through the lab testing. So it's a pretty thorough group of foods that they've gone through. So basically what I'm going to go through now is how the low FODMAP diet works. So it's not meant to be a long-term solution. This is not meant to be something that you follow for the rest of your life. It's a temporary elimination diet intended just to help you identify what specific food triggers you have or what specific foods trigger your IBS symptoms. So most people are only sensitive to some FODMAP containing foods and groups. So there are two phases of the low FODMAP diet: elimination and reintroduction. There's also a third phase where you personalize the plan to the person. But the two main phases of the low FODMAP diet are the elimination phase and the reintroduction phase. So the elimination phase lasts anywhere from 2 to 6 weeks, depending on the person. This phase is intended solely to reduce inflammation in the digestive system. So during this phase, no FODMAP containing foods should be consumed. So through this process, you should be able to alleviate a lot of your IBS symptoms just by not having the FODMAPs in your diet. So usually within 2 weeks or so, I start to see clients have some improvement in their symptoms. Some people, it takes a little bit longer for that built up inflammation to go down. So they usually say anywhere between 2 to 6 weeks. So once a baseline is achieved, which is basically no noticeable GI symptoms occurring, then the reintroduction phase begins. So during the reintroduction phase, test foods are reintroduced from each of the FODMAP groups. And if you recall, the FODMAP groups that we went over were the fermentable, oligo, di, monosaccharides, and polyols. So those are broken down into different FODMAP groups. So test foods are reintroduced from each FODMAP group to determine if this FODMAP group is a trigger for symptoms. So each test food, and there's a list of test foods that Monash has provided for the reintroduction phase. Each test food is reintroduced over a 2 to 3 day period, starting with a small dose on the first day and increasing each day following. So what we really look for during that time is to keep everything else the same. Keep all of your meal patterns the same, keep all of your meal times the same, all of your meal sizing the same, and all of the foods that you're eating relatively similar. Because that gives us a good idea if we're reintroducing a food, if that's the only thing that's changed and thus could have caused symptoms. I saw a hand go up. Did you have a question? You can type it into the chat box if you want to ask a question. I'll wait for this question to come through and I'll keep talking as we're waiting. So if there's no reaction, then the FODMAP group is considered safe to eat. But if there's symptoms that are experienced, this food should be eaten with caution or fully eliminated depending on the severity of the reaction. So sometimes people will get symptoms that it's like, it's not a full flare, but it's a little bit of discomfort or reflux or something like that, where we can say, okay, this is something that we want to avoid for the most part. But if you go out to eat or there's a special occasion and you want to include it, it's not going to have you down and out for a couple of days. So we kind of identify those foods as sometimes foods, or in our case, the way that we work with clients, we use them as red light, green light, or yellow light foods. And these would be in the yellow light food category. So the low FODMAP diet, again, should be followed closely during the reintroduction phase to eliminate any possible confounding variables. But once the 2 phases of the diet are complete, and this reintroduction phase could take as long as it takes you to get through these reintroductions. So I usually say about 10 weeks minimum, if not a little bit more, depending on what's going on in the person's life. If you've got things that hold you up, or, you know, if you can get through these reintroductions fairly quickly, then it can be a little bit shorter. But once the 2 phases of the diet are complete, you will then liberalize the diet according to your results and personalize as necessary. So since the bulk of the low FODMAP diet requires eating strictly foods low in FODMAPs, we're going to learn how to meal plan for a week within the limitations of the elimination phase. But another thing that I want to mention is the reason why this is a temporary elimination diet and shouldn't be followed long-term is because there's potential for nutrient deficiencies if you aren't doing this in a calculated way, or if you're following this for too long. So since you're eliminating so many foods, getting the right match of foods within the limitations of the low FODMAP diet that give you the right nutrients to just stay overall healthy is a little bit difficult. So we usually recommend that this is a temporary elimination, just intended to identify triggers, and it should be liberalized and personalized as you go through the reintroductions. So I didn't see this question come through, so I'm going to move into the next section, which is where I'm just going to go over 6 tips for successful meal planning for the low FODMAP diet. And we'll go through this first, and then we'll jump into the actual meal plan itself. So my first tip for all of my clients, whether you're doing the low FODMAP diet, whether you have IBS, or whether you have any other GI condition, or really any condition in general, but speaking upon GI conditions, educate yourself as much as possible. This can be difficult to do with the abundance of information that you can find on the internet. There's a lot of conflicting things that people are writing and telling you, and different articles say different things, because really there's no one size fits all approach when it comes to IBS. Everyone's triggers are different and everyone's IBS is different. So educate yourself on all of the facts about IBS, what you need to know, proper treatment approaches, and that will give you a better idea of really how to move forward with your IBS treatment. So bottom line, low FODMAP diet can be confusing. So educate yourself on how to do it safely to avoid any nutrient deficiencies, and just make sure that you know when it's appropriate to reintroduce the foods you've eliminated. My second tip is to get organized. I love getting organized. I think it's the basis to being successful in anything. So gather all of your low FODMAP materials before you start to do your meal planning. So when you're sitting down to make a meal plan, the best thing that you can do is have your low FODMAP food guide, which is something that we provide to all of our clients. It basically is a list of high versus low FODMAP foods, things that are safe in any quantity and can be eaten freely. So have your low FODMAP guide there, and have some low FODMAP recipes on hand to help build your plan. Our member portal for our clients has a great resource of recipes that a lot of them are low FODMAP or can be altered to be low FODMAP, which is something that you could work closely with your dietitian to identify any substitutions that need to be made. But regardless, there's a lot of low FODMAP recipes. So what I like to do is have my clients have their low FODMAP guide and their low FODMAP recipes out, things that they may want to make that week to help build out their plan. The third tip is to embrace gluten-free starches. This is a really tough one for a lot of my clients, because the first thing that they hear is that you have to be gluten-free to follow the low FODMAP diet. But thankfully, there are a lot of really great gluten-free starches and a lot of really great gluten-free substitution products now. So starch options are inherently limited during the elimination phase of the low FODMAP diet. But FODMAP-friendly gluten-free starches include rice, quinoa, rice noodles, gluten-free pretzels, rice cakes, buckwheat. So there's a lot of really great gluten-free starch options, not to mention potatoes and sweet potatoes in limited quantities. So you've got a lot of really great options there. And what we do a lot with our clients is vetting different products to make sure that they are in fact low FODMAP. So they might be gluten-free, but there might be another ingredient in there that is high FODMAP. So we might need to avoid that product. So a lot of what we do is label reading and making sure that we're getting the right products in the diet. So The fourth tip is to utilize lactose-free dairy products. So lactose-free is another one that's really tough. Dairy-free is another one that's really tough, just for the low FODMAP diet in general. But lactose really is the issue here, not necessarily the dairy itself. So lactose is high FODMAP, but you can include lactose-free dairy products to help reduce the IBS symptoms. So lactose-free yogurt, nut milks, lactose-free cheeses, they're all viable substitutes. Again, just make sure to touch base with your dietitian, read the labels, and make sure that you're getting something that truly is low FODMAP. And that brings me to my next tip, read nutrition labels. So many packaged products contain sneaky sources of FODMAPs like onion and garlic powder that are in really small quantities, but still cause it to be high FODMAP in its essence. So be sure to read the ingredients section of the nutrition label on prepackaged foods to ensure you're not mistakenly getting FODMAPs in your diet. And then my sixth tip is to plan out smaller, more frequent meals. So this is a really big change for a lot of my clients. I think traditionally our society has us eating 3 large meals throughout the day, when in reality, meal patterns are one of the biggest triggers for IBS symptoms. So aside from FODMAPs, meal patterns are one of the biggest triggers. Eating too large of meals, waiting too long to eat, eating too quickly are all different things that I've seen that have caused issues with my clients and their symptoms. So even if you're eating strict low FODMAP, if your meal patterns are all wonky, it could cause you to still see symptoms. So be sure to include smaller, more frequent meals throughout the day in your meal plan. So I want to take some questions right now. If anybody has any questions, please feel free to type them out. I want to make sure that we get questions on this section first, because it was very content heavy, and then we'll move on to the actual meal plan itself. So if anyone has any questions, I'll just wait a minute or so to see if anything comes through. And if anyone has any experience with the low FODMAP diet and wants to chime in at the end, I would love to hear about it. I was talking to one of my teammates and saying that like a lot of the clients that come to us for low FODMAP, they come to us and they say, I tried low FODMAP already. It didn't work for me because I had a really hard time following it without the help of a dietitian, because it is a really confusing diet. So I do recommend, if you have the opportunity to ever work with a dietitian through the low FODMAP, it's worth giving it a second go if you've already done it and not seen success, because it might have been some of these other external factors that might have been throwing you off. But I saw this question come through and it says, will this diet help with diverticulitis? My answer to that is it's kind of up in the air. We're not really sure yet. We don't have enough research on it, but from what I know about diverticulitis, the treatment approach after a flare, so after you've already, done a little bit of the bowel rest and let your GI just kind of calm down after a diverticulitis flare, the recommendation is a very, very high fiber diet, because the issue with diverticulitis is always going to be constipation or blockage or anything like that, because that's really when the pockets in the intestines become inflamed, is when there's not consistent movement through your intestines. So my answer to that would be, I don't think that this will help. The research doesn't show whether it helps or not yet, but from my opinion and what I know about diverticulitis, the low FODMAP diet is not very high in fiber because it cuts out so many whole grains, beans, legumes, a lot of nuts and seeds, and a lot of fruits and vegetables. So my answer would be no, but I just saw your message come through saying help with the flare care. I do think that it might help with flare care because you're not getting a ton of GI irritating foods in there, and you're also not getting a whole lot of fiber, which is, right after a flare, you need a lower fiber diet. And then after that, normalizing your diet and keeping it high in fiber is the recommendation. So I hope that answered your question. So I'm going to move on to the meal planning guide, and we're going to jump into that because it doesn't seem like any other questions are coming through. But if you have any other questions, just feel free to send them through and I'll answer them all at the end of this section. But in terms of the meal planning guide, I kind of just want to talk about really quick why meal planning is important. And Meal planning is really important for any type of person. Most of us lead very busy lives, and that unfortunately means that some things get pushed to the back burner when life gets a bit hectic. So meal planning gives us the chance to take the guesswork out of what we'll be eating all week and takes one more task off of our plates. This is really helpful for anyone because it's really important to get proper nutrition, of course, but especially for someone with IBS, this is so important. Because if your life gets hectic and you don't have time to think about what you're eating, you're just going to grab whatever's there. And a lot of times that's going to cause your symptoms to worsen. So having really well-rounded, FODMAP-friendly, GI-friendly stuff that's just there, readily available, already planned out is going to make your life so much easier. Just basically takes another task off of our plates. But this can be especially helpful when following a restrictive diet, such as low FODMAP, since the meal planning process tends to require a bit more thought and, like I said before, creativity. So meal planning can look different from person to person depending on what your schedule requires. Some people like to have all of their meals planned and prepped for the week so that they don't have to think about it in the moment, while others like to plan, say, just dinners and then leave the rest up to whatever they feel like having that day. Regardless, having a baseline meal plan to fall back on when life gets crazy is always a helpful tool. So this is something that I like to work through with my clients as like an emergency plan. Like, what are things that you always have around the house that we can throw together meals with that will be FODMAP friendly, won't cause you any issues, and then, you know, you can kind of lean on those in your time of need. So all of the first page here, you're going to get a copy of this PowerPoint slides to take home with you. But all of this first page here is basically what I went over in my 6 tips at the beginning of the presentation. So you've got all of those there just to kind of remember what are the most important things when meal planning for a low FODMAP diet. So where to begin? First place to begin, my favorite meal of the day, breakfast. So when it comes to low FODMAP planning for breakfast, I'm going to show you just a flash of the actual whole meal plan put together, and then we're going to dive into like the specific pieces of it. So this whole meal plan will show you basically a 7-day meal plan, sample plan that you can follow. So what I really did was I created 4 unique days here. So Monday, Wednesday, and Friday are the same. Tuesday and Thursday are the same. And then Saturday and Sunday are unique. So I like to prep some things or plan some things that I can have a couple of days in a row while also adding some variety in there. So 4 unique days really is a good mix of variety, but also convenience because you've already thought of the ideas. You can kind of use your leftovers and prep a little bit with that too. If you look at the top here, it says your daily servings. I just based these off of some serving ranges. If you were to work with one of our dietitians, if you're not already a member or nutritionist, you would probably have a little bit more specific targets than this based on your height, your weight, your activity, your goals. If your goal is weight loss, maintenance, weight gain, whatever it is. So you would probably have a little bit more of a specific target there with maybe some ranges built in, but that's all dependent on what you and your dietitian or nutritionist decides is best for you. So for this example, we just have some ranges that kind of would fit for a lot of people. But if you were to work with one of our dietitians or nutritionists, you'd get a much more personalized approach. So this is basically the flash of the entire week. And now I'm just going to dive into breakfast. So as I was saying, breakfast is my favorite meal. I think that you can come up with a lot of really good staple items for breakfast that you can kind of rotate throughout the couple of weeks that you're in the elimination phase. What's really nice about low FODMAP and breakfast is that I think that there's a lot of staple breakfast items that are low FODMAP. So it makes it a little bit easier for you to do the planning for that. For example, a lot of my clients love eggs. Eggs are a really great low FODMAP staple. Same thing with oats. So you've got 2 really good breakfast items there, and then we've got some stuff to get a little bit more creative on the weekends. So generally, I like to have a few different breakfast ideas and options to rotate throughout the week. But however you like to structure your morning is totally up to you. Some people exercise in the morning, some people don't. Some people like to sleep in, some people like to get up early. So if you like to have a smaller breakfast, than this, you could always split it into 2 portions, or you could keep it kind of the same as what I've planned out here. But I like to have a small, well-rounded breakfast followed by a small mid-morning snack, just to ensure I'm not overloading my system first thing in the morning, followed by a long overnight fasting period. That's something that I often see induces symptoms in my clients with IBS. So if you are finding that when you eat a big breakfast first thing in the morning, you get abdominal pain or you're seeing symptoms right after, a lot of times it's because you've overloaded your system with too much food after not having any food at all overnight. So what my recommendation for that would be to have a small snack actually first thing when you wake up, and then have a little bit of a larger breakfast during like the mid-morning snack timing. I just saw a chat come in here. Okay, I'll answer these questions at the end of the meal planning slides, because there's a few in here that I'd like to get to. Some good examples of FODMAP-friendly breakfasts, like I said, are eggs, or in this case, egg muffins. They're a really great recipe from our On Point Nutrition member portal. If you are not an On Point member, you will still receive the links to these recipes, and you'll be able to utilize them as well. Oats are another great one. Gluten-free pancakes, which we make with oat flour and banana, are great, and gluten-free toast. So the examples of meals here might seem a bit smaller than your average meal. Again, the idea is to be eating every 2 to 3 hours as opposed to 4 to 5. So it should hold you over quite nicely. So we're going to move on now to lunch, and then we're going to backtrack at the end and go through snacks. So lunches are typically the meal I like to prep in advance. I find my time to be the most crunched in the middle of the day. It totally depends on what your schedule is, but a lot of my clients who, work, or they have families or whatever, they've got a lot of stuff going on midday. So having that lunch prepped is really nice to just kind of lean on. So it helps keep you from veering off the elimination phase if there's something readily available. I'll typically prep some sort of pasta salad or rice bowl for this meal because they tend to keep really well over a couple of days. So, if you make like a salad or something like that, it could get soggy after like, a day or two. So I usually like to do stuff that's grain-based because that gives me a little bit more something hearty that will keep well. And when I say pasta salad, I usually use like a brown rice pasta or something in the case of the low FODMAP elimination. On the weekends, I'll usually opt just for leftovers from dinner the night before to keep it easy. And to keep this meal well-rounded, I'll typically shoot for some sort of protein, starch, vegetable combo. So the dream team, protein, starch, vegetable is the best combination you could have. Helps check off a lot of your targets here. And it's also just a very well-rounded meal. So pairing these 3 things together helps with satiety and keeping your food intake just balanced and nutrient dense. So the next one I'm going to go over. Oh, and if you see here, I have some examples. I've got like a pasta salad, which is one that I usually make quite frequently. So I make like tuna with some veggies in it. And it's basically like a tuna noodle salad. There's also our healthier pad thai, which is great. It's a meatless meal. It's got tofu in it. So if you're somebody who is leaning more towards plant-based, that's a really great option. Or if you're just going for like, a mixture of meatless versus meat containing, that's a really great one. And that one also keeps really well over a couple of days. And then I have a savory oatmeal for Saturday. That's a nice, easy Saturday lunch that you can throw together. And if you've never had savory oatmeal, you're missing out. It's incredible. I'm not a big sweets person, so I love a good savory oatmeal. It's basically like oatmeal risotto in a sense. So that one is delicious. I would definitely check that out. And then also just a really simple lemon pepper chicken. It's basically just lemon pepper seasoning or lemon juice with pepper. And you just kind of pan sear it and then throw it together with some veggies. So those are my really good, quick, easy go-to lunch options. And they've all got nice different flavors. You can see there, you've got the oats, you've got the pad thai that takes on a little bit more of an Asian flair. And then there's pasta salad, which is just a little bit more comfort food. So you've got a little bit of everything in there, which is great. And then dinners. So dinner is typically the meal where I like to add some variety. So, the day is winding down. I don't have as much going on. With the low FODMAP diet being so restrictive, it's important to be creative and use seasonings and a variety of proteins to your advantage. So aside from garlic, onion, and chili powder, most seasonings, unless they're really spicy, should be on the table. So just feel free to explore flavors that you wouldn't normally try. In addition, protein is your friend during the low FODMAP diet, at least animal containing proteins are. So all sources of animal proteins, more or less, are free from FODMAPs. The only ones that might bother people that I caution people with are really high fat meats, because not from a FODMAP standpoint, but from an IBS standpoint, they're a little bit harder to digest. So most of your lean protein options should be totally on the table. But you can see here that the dinners I chose use many different sources of protein: pork loin, ground turkey, chicken drumsticks, tofu. So similar to lunch, I prefer to combine starch, protein, and vegetable here to get a variety of nutrients and make the meal more filling. So what I went with here was slow cooked pork loin, which traditionally our recipe is a garlic pepper pork loin. We just omit the garlic for low FODMAP, and it is delicious. We also have a taco bowl here, which I love. This is one of my staple low FODMAP or GI friendly meals. And there's a really great low FODMAP taco seasoning by the brand FODI. I'm really not sure how to pronounce it, but it's a great brand. They make a low FODMAP taco seasoning. You can also make one yourself. I usually just Google like low FODMAP taco seasoning and just kind of takes out the ingredients that are high FODMAP. So that's a really great staple. Put it over some brown rice with some sauteed red bell pepper and some low FODMAP salsa. FODI also has a great low FODMAP salsa as well. And then I threw in salt and pepper chicken drumsticks, which is a great sheet pan meal. So a great Saturday night sheet pan comfort dinner. It's potatoes, chicken drumsticks. You can throw a veggie with it. It's got some lemon, some salt and pepper, but it really is delicious, and it's a sheet pan meal. So it's kind of just throw it together, not a lot of dishes, one and done. Really good. And then I made up a tofu stir fry, which is something that I make quite often. I love tofu because it soaks in any of the flavors that you put with it. So it's a really great base for something really flavorful. So you could either do just like a plain soy sauce kind of mixture, or also the brand FODI, and I'm sorry I'm referencing them a lot. They just have really great low FODMAP products. They have a teriyaki sauce. So you could also do something like that. And just do some low FODMAP veggies, whatever you've got on hand, over some brown rice with some tofu and teriyaki sauce, or some gluten-free soy sauce in this case. So those are my quick, easy dinners that I really like to throw together. And again, just kind of rotating different flavors and cuisines that you can kind of add some variety. Next, I want to go through some snack ideas. So you'll see here I threw in some stuff, lots of low FODMAP fruits, smoothies. You've got some hard-boiled eggs in there for some protein. You could do some low FODMAP dressing with some veggies, which is a really great way to just kind of add some pizzazz to your veggies. Oh, and on Sunday, I put in there like sliced cucumbers with tuna and some mayo. So I make basically like a little tuna salad and put it on some cucumbers. It's delicious. So those are my really good low FODMAP snacks. I kind of just build out the meal plan and then look for gaps in my target. So what am I missing? Do I need fats? Do I need starches? Do I need proteins? Do I need fruits? And that's really how I decide what I want to have as snacks for the day. So that will pretty much do it. So this is basically our meal planning guide. But with the snacks, another tip that I like to throw in there is that they're just basically to bridge the gap in between meals. Your meals should be smaller. They should be more frequent to properly manage any GI condition. But the smaller your main meals are, the more you're going to need snacks in between. You can't expect to just have small meals and nothing in between. You'll just be so hungry all day, and we don't want that. So the best thing that you can do is just basically split them up into smaller, more frequent meals. And I tell clients all the time too, like your snacks don't have to be snacks. They can be small meals. You can do half of your breakfast at breakfast time and then the other half at mid-morning snack if you want. Or you can do a small portion of whatever you've prepped for the week as a snack. So however you want to go about it, totally up to you. They don't have to be traditional snacks to fit in there. But they definitely can get repetitive. So I like to do a small portion of leftovers here and there just to kind of switch it up. But that is pretty much the meal planning guide. What I have for you next is basically just a shopping list that goes over all of the things that are in this meal plan to help, and the correct amounts too, to be able to properly execute this week's worth of food, to help you shop. So here's the protein foods, the starches, and the dairy. And then on the next slide, we have the fruits and vegetables, and then the fats and condiments. So you can see the fats and condiments is a very long list for this low FODMAP meal planning guide. I do that on purpose to add more flavor, because really the hardest thing that my clients have is just getting variety. So I think that's the most important piece there, and kind of helps just to add some fun stuff in there. So we also have a blank meal planning guide for you, and also a blank shopping list to create your own. So you will all get a copy of this, and you'll be able to utilize this to your advantage. But I'm going to leave this slide up. I'm going to answer some of those questions that were in the chat box. And then while I'm answering those, please feel free to send over any other questions that you might have, and I will answer those as well. So the first question that I had was, does low FODMAP help with chronic diarrhea? All my labs with gastroenterologists came back normal. So unfortunately with IBS, it's basically just a diagnosis that they can't find anything else wrong with you, and you have these symptoms that are consistent with this condition. So it's kind of just ruling out other things. So even if your labs came back normal, it's possible that you do have IBS, but regardless, chronic diarrhea, it should help with that. If it doesn't, then you might be in that small subset of the population where specific foods are not triggering your chronic diarrhea. It could be your meal patterns, it could be exercise, it could be your mental health, anxiety and depression, and other mental health conditions have a way of also influencing your GI symptoms. So it could be a multitude of things, but my recommendation would be to try it. What's the worst that happens? If you try low FODMAP for 2 to 3 weeks and nothing works, then you kind of look for a different avenue. But we also have a ton of blogs on our site through the On Point Nutrition site. So if you go to onpoint-nutrition.com and just search for all of our IBS related blogs, there's also a blog on a fiber conscious IBS diet. There's a whole section on how to actually do the low FODMAP. So this is something that, like, if you do the low FODMAP, it doesn't work, or even if you're intimidated by the low FODMAP process, I would work with a dietitian, because there's a lot of different approaches that can be taken if this doesn't work. But to answer your question, long story short, it should. It's intended to help with that problem. If it doesn't, then it might be a different trigger. The second question that I have on here is, you have a lot of bananas, but on the Monash app, bananas are red. I'd really like to eat bananas again. I totally hear you. Bananas are a finicky one because they have to be the certain stage of ripeness. So green bananas you basically have to get it like right in between where it would be too ripe. So like the perfect banana, nothing too green, nothing too ripe. It's got to be right in between. If it gets too ripe, then you're better off leaning more towards a green banana. But if it gets too ripe, that can induce symptoms. So that's another thing about FODMAP, is that some cooking techniques, some ripening processes, and things like that, they can alter the FODMAP content in your food. So with bananas, just make sure that you're leaning more towards green or right in the middle. My trick that I tell my clients all the time is, if you get a bunch of bananas and you only get to 1 or 2 of them before they start getting like a little bit too ripe, then I would peel them and throw them in the freezer. You can use them for banana nice cream, which is a really great low FODMAP dessert. You basically just throw frozen bananas into a blender with a little bit of almond milk, or I'm sorry, in this case, rice milk or something, just low FODMAP, that it basically makes like an ice cream consistency. And it's a really great low FODMAP dessert, or you can use it in smoothies. So I always do that, and then just kind of get like, a smaller bunch of bananas for the next week to make sure that they don't go bad. But bananas can be a really great staple of a low FODMAP diet. You just have to be careful about the ripe stage that they're in. But I hope that answers your question. And I'll just wait a couple of minutes to see if any other questions come through. I'd love to answer any questions or hear about anybody's experience with the low FODMAP diet, or if anybody wants to just send a note saying like, I've tried it or I'm doing it right now. I just love to hear where you guys are at with your IBS journey. And just for context, I have done the low FODMAP diet for myself. I also have IBS. So this is really what got me into this field and why I love working with clients with GI conditions. And I truly understand how restrictive this diet is. So my goal when working with clients, and all of our goal as a team when working with clients, is to make this as least painful as possible, because I know a lot of people have to cut out a lot of the foods that they really love. But the great news is working with clients with this specific topic has been so rewarding, because I've been able to actually see the benefit and people feeling good after not feeling good for so long. So there is light at the end of the tunnel. And if you need help with your low FODMAP journey, we're definitely here to help. Perfect. I just got the response in the chat that says, luckily you prefer your bananas just ripe and not overripe, so you're in luck there. It is unfortunate because overripe bananas are the best way to make banana bread, but you can, if you really mash hard enough, you can get those green bananas to be ripe enough to make some banana bread. And we'll find a low FODMAP recipe for that too. But anybody else have any other questions for me? I'll hang around for another minute or so just to make sure that we've gotten to everything. I hope this was helpful. I feel like low FODMAP can be a tricky one, mainly from a variety perspective, but also just there's a lot of other variables that come into play, which is why I wanted to do a big intro for this, just to give everyone an idea of like, if low FODMAP's not working, there's a lot of other facets of your life that you can look into that might be the reason that you're still seeing symptoms. So don't give up hope. You might be in that 20% of people, but you might not. And it might be just a matter of doing less intense workouts or eating smaller meals, or, you know, getting more sleep. Honestly, sleep can interrupt things as well. So if you ever have any questions like that, like I said, our website is a great place to find low FODMAP resources, and also your dietitian or nutritionist is a really great resource for you as well. And I got a note here that says you've been trying this diet and appreciate this meeting. It is tricky. It's definitely really tricky, but I'm really glad you got something out of it. And like I said, if you need any other help and you're not already working with a dietitian, that's definitely your best bet. They are the best resource for this. What about alcohol, and what other drinks are good? Teas. Okay, so drinks are really tough. The main thing that alcohol is inherently high in FODMAPs. The fermenting process is going to cause the FODMAP content to spike. So I am very realistic with my clients when I say I understand that you're not going to stop drinking for the entirety of the elimination and reintroduction phase for that long. I totally understand. So what I like to do with my clients is, the first thing I've noticed is that for whatever reason, white wine is more well tolerated than other alcohols in general with my clients doing the low FODMAP diet. So I usually wait until I have them eliminated during the elimination phase. And then I basically do a reintroduction with whatever alcohol they want to drink, as if I was doing a reintroduction of a test food. So I'll have them do like half a glass of white wine the first day, and then a full glass of white wine the second day. And we'll just see if they have any symptoms. If they don't, then I'm okay with them, drinking that in moderation. But I also have them not drink on the days that they're doing reintroductions, because it could cause confounding results. But to answer your question, alcohol's high FODMAP. I kind of just try to navigate it the best I can with each client specifically. And we really just do it as a reintroduction, as if you were reintroducing a food, just to ensure that there's no real issue there. And I always try to encourage moderation, because most people aren't going to feel great the next day if they're drinking a lot anyways. And it's hard to differentiate whether that's a FODMAP issue or whether that's a quantity issue. So in moderation, be cautious about reintroducing it as a test food. And that's pretty much the best way to go about it. But the other part of that too is anything that you're mixing it with, just make sure that it is a low FODMAP mixer. So something like a flavored seltzer that's flavored with something low FODMAP or something like that would be fine. Teas are up in the air. There's a few teas that are okay, a few teas that are not. That's basically something that you just have to reference. Monash University has a great low FODMAP app that I would recommend downloading if you're interested in this topic. It does cost money. I think it's $7, I think, but it's really worth being able to look up any food and figure out if it's low FODMAP or not. So teas, I know that I think like black tea is okay, peppermint tea is okay, but there's a few other teas that are not. So I'm not really sure off the top of my head. It's something that I always have to search every time a client asks, but basically the short answer is some teas are, some teas aren't. Make sure that you're using a reliable resource to figure out whether your tea is okay. The only other thing is too, they're not high FODMAP, but artificial sweeteners are really, really tough for clients with GI conditions. So if you're looking at a food or a drink or whatever that has artificial sweeteners in it and otherwise is low FODMAP, I would stay away from it during your low FODMAP journey because the artificial sweeteners tend to be really tough on people's GI. So I usually say to stay away from artificial sweeteners, not as a FODMAP issue, but just as a general IBS issue, and then reintroduce them as necessary. So a lot of mixers and like regular drinks, protein powders, stuff like that, they have a lot of artificial sweeteners in there that I would be careful with. But I hope that answered your question. Any other questions floating around? You're welcome. I just got to thank you in the chat. But I'll stick around just for a couple more minutes to see if anybody has any other questions. But again, I hope you guys got a lot out of this. And like I said, please use all of our resources online. Best thing that you can do is get reliable information. So how long is the reintroduction period? Elimination was 4 to 6 weeks, right? So elimination can be anywhere from 2 to 6. I've had clients be all over the place. Some of my clients feel great right away. And at 2 weeks, we start the reintroduction. Some people wait until about 6 weeks because they're still having residual symptoms, or we're working out some of those other variables that might be causing their symptoms as well, like meal size, meal timing, stuff like that. Reintroduction period has been all over the place with my clients specifically. Monash in their training says like 10 weeks or so to get through the reintroductions, just because you need to give enough time to do like washout periods in between so that your body's not building up any inflammation from these FODMAP reintroductions. Depending on my clients, I've had people go from 10 weeks all the way to like 30, 40 weeks. Really like the reintroductions start to taper off towards the end, but usually in those scenarios, I have clients that are, they have a wedding this weekend, or they have, something going on where their food is not going to be as controlled and they see symptoms, and then we have to do another washout period and we have to wait on the reintroduction. So unfortunately, the more controlled your life is, the quicker the reintroduction phase goes. But you can't control everything in life. So we just kind of wait it out, wait for you to feel better, and then we start the reintroductions again, and just kind of go from there. But the great thing about the reintroductions, I don't know if I mentioned this, I should have, but if you reintroduce a food and you experience no symptoms, you can liberalize with that food right away. So you can start reintroducing another food, or I'm sorry, you can start eating that food that you've reintroduced and didn't see symptoms with right away. And it basically liberalizes itself along the way, which is great. I hope that answers your question. And then I just got another question that says, if a client has an off day during elimination, does not follow the restriction, would you recommend restarting the phase, or would it be dependent on the symptoms experienced? Absolutely not. No. So what happens is that once you reintroduce the food, that's basically a trial. It tells you if your body accepts this food or if this is a trigger for your body. So from there, again, you can start eating that food right away, even through the reintroduction phase. That's totally fine. If you have an off day and you're like, I don't even know what happened today, like I ended up having to get food out and now I'm experiencing symptoms, I totally blew the low FODMAP, All we do then is give you a couple of days of washout where you're just eating strict low FODMAP. You don't do any reintroductions, and you try to keep everything as in control and meticulous as possible. And then once you start to feel a good baseline back and your symptoms are gone, the inflammation is down, you're feeling pretty good, then we'll start the reintroductions right where we left off. So like I said, the elimination or the reintroduction phase takes a lot longer for some people because they have really busy lives and there's a lot of things that get in the way. But that's okay. That doesn't mean that we need to start fresh. That was a great question. Anyone else have any questions? Not seeing anything come through yet. But I'll still hang out for a minute just to make sure I'm catching everything. What is the percentage of success on low FODMAP in general? Are you asking like with my clients specifically, or like just with the low FODMAP population? So with the low FODMAP population, I honestly have no idea. They may have said this in my training, but I don't remember. I do know that if it's followed precisely, unless you're in that 20% of the IBS population that this just won't work for because they don't have specific food triggers, then it should work. It's just the process is hard to follow, and it really depends on your discipline and having the right resources. I really think if you have a dietitian to like kind of soundboard through this with, it's really, really helpful, because I've had a lot of clients who, you know, that question that I got before about like restarting the phase all over again. I've had clients that have come to me and they've been like, oh my gosh, I didn't know I could just do a 3-day washout period and just, you know, and not have to restart. Like people put their lives on hold because of this. And that's my goal as a dietitian, is to make this very sustainable over time. You need to have variety. You need to know when it's okay to take a break from this and come back to it. And I think that having that soundboard there of somebody who does this every single day is really where the success comes from. I think the success comes from actually doing this process in the right way and troubleshooting along the way too. But percentage of low FODMAP success with my clients is right now 100%. My clients have, any client that I've worked on low FODMAP with, unless it didn't work out for some other reason, they've gotten through low FODMAP. We've done what we've needed to do. They know what their triggers are. They have a list of their trigger foods, whether they're full triggers, whether they just induce a little bit of symptoms, or whether they, you know, cause them just to be absolutely, you know, a total flare. They know exactly what their triggers are, and they've been able to personalize their diet and their approach to them. So with me personally, and what I'm seeing with my clients, it's been 100%. And I have a lot of clients that are working through it right now, but it's going really well. So I think it's just dependent on if you commit and you follow through, or if you're part of that, again, 20% of people that the low FODMAP diet just isn't going to work no matter what. And I haven't had a client that has happened with yet. The only client that I have had that's happened with actually never had an IBS diagnosis and actually had a different GI condition that needed a totally different approach. So that's the only time I've really had that happen. So I think it just really depends on if you follow through or not. That was a good question. Anyone else have any other questions? You're welcome. How do you know it's a trigger? Do you have an episode immediately? So through my training with Monash, I realized that they said that you can have an episode immediately. You can have it up to 48 hours after. More often than not, my clients have symptoms immediately, either while they're eating the food, right after they're eating the food, or within, I would say, 4 hours after eating the food. So if a client has symptoms, let's say like after dinner, I'll look at everything they've eaten up up until that point, that day, and then from basically like the afternoon the day before to make sure that there was no, issue. But if I've a lot of my clients like will eat the food and immediately after they'll say, I had stomach pain, I had abdominal pain, I had reflux, I had gas, whatever it is. It usually happens pretty quickly. The only time I see it really carry over quite frequently is if they reintroduce something at dinner time and then they'll get symptoms like later overnight or like in the morning. I'd be interested to hear if anybody is doing low FODMAP and has had a different experience, if you get like late onset triggers or anything like that. But I hope that answered your question. You're welcome. Any other questions floating around out there? Seems like the questions are slowing down. All right, well, I don't think we have any other questions coming through. Yeah, I'm not seeing any others coming through. So I'm gonna get ready to sign off. But I hope you guys enjoyed this webinar. I'm excited for you guys to get your materials. I'd love to hear from you guys. We have an On Point Nutrition client support group. It's an IBS Q&A group on Facebook. You can sign up for that through our website. So if you go to any of our IBS pages or low FODMAP pages, you'll see at the bottom, there's an IBS Q&A Facebook group link. I would love to see all of you in there asking questions, getting more information. That's really the first step in like connecting with our IBS community. So if you feel like that's something that you would be interested in, please, please, please feel free to check that out. I'd love for you to message me and ask me some more questions there. And then, if anybody isn't an On Point client and is looking for more help with this, I would love to see and work with you in the future. So thank you guys so much for coming. This has been great. If you're interested in what we do at On Point in general, you'll be receiving an email with more information and a recording of the webinar in your inbox tomorrow. So thank you so much for coming. I hope you guys have a good night and good luck with your IBS journey. I wish you the best.